Imagine your boss calls you into his office, right? And he hands you a briefcase containing $4 million in cash.
Wow. Okay, that's a good day.
Right. But then he says he is leaving the country for some undisclosed amount of time. And he just gives you full control over all that money and walks out the door.
Just completely leaves it in your hands.
Yes, completely. So months later, he returns. And he asks what you did with the capital. And you have to tell him that you actually went out into the woods, dug a hole, and buried it.
Because you're afraid of the stock market.
Yeah, you tell him you were just terrified of losing it. Now, imagine his reaction to that. I mean, he doesn't just fire you.
Right.
He doesn't just say, give me the money back. He actually looks at you and issues this massive moral condemnation. He calls you a wicked, morally corrupt, cowardly rebel. And then he has you thrown out into the dark.
It is such an intense visual.
It really is. So welcome to Reform Thinking. Today, we are staring down the terrifying reality of Matthew chapter 25, verses 26 through 28.
Yes, we are.
And usually when we think about a legal verdict in a modern courtroom, we expect a very clean sense of proportion. Like someone commits a minor infraction, a judge hands down a small fine, and the whole system feels, well, predictable.
Right. The punishment fixed the crime, as they say.
But when you open this ancient text, that predictable, comfortable scale just shatters completely. The judicial landscape we are walking into today leaves zero room for appeal.
No room at all.
And it challenges every single assumption modern society holds about accountability, grace, and human effort.
It really does. And we have a stack of historical, literary, and theological sources in front of us today that analyze this specific biblical passage.
Lots of great material to go through.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to basically strip away all those soft, modern assumptions we project onto the text. We want to uncover the severe mercy of Christ's words.
Which is so needed right now.
Right, because the scenario presented in the text involves a master who hands a massive fortune to a bondservant, only to return and find that fortune just hidden in the dirt.
Buried in the ground.
And the master's judgment, it falls like thunder. If you are listening to this right now, this ancient ruling is not some dusty piece of history.
No, not at all.
It directly confronts how you view your own salvation, what you believe about your works, and what it actually means to be a faithful steward of the gospel.
It forces a very uncomfortable audit, of what you are doing with the resources currently sitting in your hands.
Uncomfortable is definitely the word for it.
So I want to start by figuring out the physical and cultural ground where Jesus actually spoke these words, because we need to comprehend the shock of the master's judgment.
Right.
And we really cannot do that if we are reading it through a 21st century Western lens.
No, you miss the entire point if you do that.
So where are we historically when this parable is given? Like, what is the immediate context surrounding Jesus and his disciples?
Well, the historical setting kind of dictates the entire mood of the text. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives. We are in the final week of his earthly ministry.
So the shadow of the cross is, what, literally days away?
Days away, yes. He is speaking to his disciples who are, living under hostile Roman occupation.
Yeah.
And he is outlining the agonizing delay that will occur before his second coming.
The tension in that moment must have been incredibly high.
Unbelievably high.
Wow.
He is preparing his closest followers for a very long absence. And to communicate the gravity of this interim period, he uses this economic illustration drawn straight from the ancient Roman world.
Right.
The text centers on the institution of the bondservant, which is the doulos in Greek. And we need to define this carefully.
Because a modern reader hears the word servant and pictures.
Yeah.
Like an entry-level hourly employee.
Yeah, or a butler fetching tea or something.
Right. And that is a massive misconception. A doulos in a wealthy first-century household was operating on an entirely different level. They definitely were not just sweeping floors.
No, not at all.
What kind of authority did a bondservant actually possess when their patron left town?
They possessed almost total operational authority. In the ancient economy, a doulos belonging to a massive estate was often a highly educated, highly capable manager.
Like a chief operating officer today.
Pretty much. Wealthy Roman and Jewish patrons frequently traveled across the empire for long durations, and when they did, they didn't just freeze their assets.
They didn't put everything in a holding account.
No, they left their agricultural estates, their shipping businesses, and their vast monetary wealth entirely under the control of these bondservants.
That is a huge amount of trust.
It is. The doulos could buy and sell land, negotiate contracts, and manage massive supply chains. They operated with the full legal proxy of the master.
So to be a bondservant in this context was to be a high-level executive holding the keys to the empire.
Right. Which means the master's decision to distribute his wealth before his journey was actually a pretty standard business practice.
But the scale of what is distributed here is staggering. The text says the master gives his servants talents. And we have a major linguistic problem today because we use the word talent to describe, an inherent personal skill.
Right, like playing the piano.
Yeah. A person has a talent for playing the violin or talent for painting. But reading that definition back into the first century completely destroys the economic wheat of the parable, doesn't it?
It totally does. The linguistic shift you mentioned happened centuries later, largely because of how influential this very parable became in Western culture.
That makes sense.
But to the original audience sitting on the Mount of Olives, a talent was not a skill. It was a staggering unit of weight and currency.
Like a physical block of metal.
Yes, a talent was the largest unit of currency in the Hellenistic world. It was typically made of silver, and it weighed roughly 60 to 80 pounds.
80 pounds of silver. That is heavy.
Very heavy. And in terms of value, a single talent was equal to 6,000 denarii.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener.
Well, since one denarius was the standard daily wage for a common laborer, one talent represented roughly 20 years of continuous manual labor.
Wow. Let us run the math on that to really feel the impact. If a common laborer today makes, say, $40,000 a year, 20 years of wages equals $800,000.
Right.
So one talent is approaching $1 million in modern capital. The man who received 5 talents was handed nearly $4 million.
It is a massive sum.
Even the man who received the minimum, the one-talent servant, was handed a life-altering fortune.
And that sheer volume of wealth provides the first major conviction of the text. I mean, the one-talent individual did not receive a negligible throwaway amount.
Right, it wasn't just a few bucks.
He received a king's ransom.
Mm-hmm.
And this leaves him completely accountable. In a world where honor, loyalty, and household fidelity were the highest virtues, the master's distribution of a talent was a supreme act of trust.
So I go back to that analogy of the eccentric billionaire and the multi-million-dollar hedge fund. The sum is so astronomical that taking the briefcase of cash and burying it in the woods, it just cannot be interpreted as a sign of caution.
No, not at all.
Digging a hole to hide 80 pounds of silver is an insult to the scale of the trust. It shows a complete disregard for the magnitude of what the billionaire handed over.
And the physical act of burying it is highly significant, actually. In rabbinic law at the time, burying money was considered the safest way to guard against theft.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, to the point where if you buried an asset and it was stolen, you were legally exempt from liability.
Wow. So the servant is taking the most legally defensive, self-protecting action possible.
He is ensuring he cannot be sued by the master later.
But he is entirely ignoring the master's primary objective, which is growth. He treats the working capital of the estate like a dead body. Placing it in a tomb.
That's a great way to put it. It is high treason against the stated purpose of the estate.
So knowing the vast wealth entrusted to this steward, the most logical question we have to ask is, well, what drove this individual to dig that hole?
Right, why do it?
We have to examine the linguistic anatomy of this spiritual crime. When the master returns after a long time and audits the servants, he doesn't just ask for a financial spreadsheet.
No, he goes much further than that.
He delivers a surgical diagnosis of the servant's internal motives.
He really does. The master answers his servant by issuing a chilling verdict. He calls him wicked and slothful.
And the original Greek terms used here are incredibly vivid, aren't they?
Very precise. The master says, poner doule kai ognura. Let us isolate those terms for a second.
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Poneros is the word translated as wicked. It denotes malignant, active evil. It is a state of being morally corrupt and harmful.
It's not just making a mistake.
No. It is the same root word frequently used in the New Testament to describe the devil himself, the evil one.
I want to pause on that because it is such a devastating detail. The master does not call him mistaken. He does not say, you made a very poor financial calculation.
He doesn't soften it at all.
No. He calls him actively, morally evil.
The master assigns a severe moral category to the servant's lack of action. And the second word, onaros, translated as slothful, is equally revealing.
What does that one mean specifically?
It means hesitating or cowardly reluctance. It is a sluggishness born out of fear and aversion to effort.
Okay.
And our sources analyze the specific choice of this word. because the author could have used a different Greek word, argos, which simply means idle or unemployed.
Like someone standing in the marketplace with nothing to do.
Yes, just waiting for a job. But
Yeah.
onerous carries a darker nuance. It is a calculated, cowardly refusal to act when action is demanded.
This is where the ancient text directly confronts modern psychological habits, because we love to recategorize spiritual lethargy today.
Oh, we definitely do.
We give it very polite, clinical, self-forgiving names. If someone refuses to engage in the hard work of the kingdom, we call it introversion or burnout or setting boundaries.
Oh, right. We excuse it.
We hear people say things like, oh, I just do not have the capacity for that ministry right now, or I am waiting for a more balanced season of life before I engage with my church.
But Christ takes this specific inactivity and places it firmly into the category of active rebellion.
It's sobering.
Laziness in the things of God is not an innocent temperament. It is not a psychological quirk or a product of environmental factors. According to the mouth of the returning judge, spiritual slothfulness is wickedness.
And the sources connect this word, onuros, directly back to the Old Testament. Right?
Yes, directly to the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. It is used extensively in the wisdom literature, specifically the book of Proverbs, to describe the sluggard.
The sluggard in Proverbs is such a fascinating psychological profile.
Yeah.
I mean, he is the guy who refuses to plow his field because he says it is too cold outside.
Or who claims he cannot go to work because there is a lion in the streets.
Yeah, always an excuse.
Always. And the most potent connection is found in Proverbs 26, verse 16. It says, "The sluggard thinks himself wiser than 7 men who can render a reason."
So he thinks he's the smart one for staying in bed.
Right. And the master in our parable is deliberately evoking the wisdom literature's condemnation of the fool. The servant's inactivity is not morally empty space. His non-action is a deliberate, hostile action.
Okay, I'm going to push back on this a little bit, because reading this through a modern lens, it feels incredibly harsh.
I can see why you'd say that.
Is the master judging the steward's personality type? Like, what if the guy is simply risk-averse?
Right. What if he's just wired that way?
The 5-talent guy clearly has an aggressive entrepreneurial spirit. The 1-talent guy might just be cautious by nature. Why is the master calling him wicked and cowardly just because he lacks a high-risk tolerance?
Well, the text actually anticipates that defense and dismantles it in the opening verses.
How so?
The master did not hand out the talents arbitrarily. The text specifically notes that he gave to each according to his ability.
Oh, so he knew their capacities.
He perfectly understood the capacity, the intellect, and the risk tolerance of the 1-talent servant. The servant was not condemned because he failed to produce the 5 talents of his peer.
He wasn't being compared to the other guy.
Right. He was condemned because he refused to be faithful within his own tailored measure of ability.
That distinction changes everything. The lack of action is not a personality quirk. It is a symptom of a hostile heart.
That completely hostile heart.
But the steward, he doesn't just stand there in silence. He actually attempts to justify his inactivity with a theological defense.
He tries to explain his reasoning.
Which leads us directly into the trap of the master's logic. Let's look at that defense.
So the steward mounts a defense based entirely on fear and character assassination.
He insults the guy to his face.
Pretty much. He tells the master, "I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed, so I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground."
It's a profoundly corrupt defense.
It is. The steward is blaming the character of the master for his own failure.
He is projecting his own malice onto his lord. He is essentially accusing the master of being a tyrannical, ruthless despot who exploits the labor of others and demands the impossible.
Right. He says, "You take profit from fields you never planted. You are greedy and terrifying."
So I was paralyzed by the fear of losing your money, and I chose the safest route.
He is trying to rebrand his apathy as a holy, reverent fear of a strict judge.
And the psychology of the wicked servant is fascinating here.
Yeah.
Because he thinks he can flatter the master's tough business reputation while simultaneously excusing his own paralysis.
But the master's response is a brilliant rhetorical snare.
It really is.
The master does not launch into a defense of his own character. He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm not a hard man. I am actually very generous."
He's a defensive at all.
No. Instead, he uses the servant's own premise to expose his guilt.
How does the Greek syntax handle that response? Because reading it in English, it reads like a phenomenal legal cross-examination.
The Greek syntax is critical here. The master says, "You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed."
It's a question.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. It is structured as an interrogative clause. The master is not confessing to being a thief or a tyrant. He is capturing the servant's own stated belief.
Okay, I follow.
It is a first-class conditional thought. He is saying, if you truly believed I was this demanding, ruthless man who demands a return on investment at all costs, then basic, self-preserving fear should have driven you to take minimal action to appease me.
He traps him with his own logic.
Yes, perfectly.
If you are terrified of a ruthless boss, you do not insult him by burying his capital. You do everything you can to generate a profit so you do not incur his wrath.
And the master presses the logic to its absolute breaking point. He says, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest.
So to understand the crushing weight of this counterargument, we really need to look at the ancient banking system.
Right, because the text refers to the bankers, or trapezites.
Who were they?
These were money changers and financiers who set up tables, called trapeza, in the public squares or the agoras of ancient cities.
So they were highly visible, universally accessible financial institutions sitting right in the middle of public life.
You would literally walk right past them every day. Any citizen could walk up to these tables, deposit their funds, and the bankers would lend that money out, paying the depositor a fixed rate of interest, which was known as tokos.
It was a completely normalized, zero-effort method of generating a return on capital.
Zero effort.
So if we bring back our modern analogy, the hedge fund manager tells the returning billionaire, hey, I knew you were a ruthless businessman who demands profit, so I was terrified of a market crash and bury the millions in the woods.
And the billionaire replies, well, if you knew I demanded a return, why didn't you just walk across the street and put the cash into a basic high-yield savings account?
It requires zero entrepreneurial skill, zero market.
And the exposure of the internal contradiction is absolute. By refusing to take even this completely passive, effortless step, the steward proves that his entire theological excuse was a lie.
He didn't hide the talent out of irreverent fear.
No, if he had, he would have visited the trapezites. He hid it out of a malignant, lazy hatred for the master's work.
The master's logic destroys the sluggard's defense, proving that the sinner's theology is always internally inconsistent.
The steward is left completely speechless. The cross-examination corners him perfectly.
But you know, the complete destruction of the steward's excuse brings us to a massive theological crossroads. As we read this, a glaring question emerges.
And it's a big one.
Does this text teach that you earn your salvation by producing enough profit for God? I mean, does the creator of the universe look at our spiritual balance sheets, tally up our good deeds, and decide if we hit the profit margin required to enter heaven?
That is the greatest danger when isolating this parable from the broader corpus of Scripture.
Yeah, it sounds like works righteousness.
If a reader approaches this text without the surrounding biblical framework, they will inevitably fall into that error. They will conclude that the kingdom of heaven is purchased through spiritual productivity.
But the sources provided for this analysis offer clear doctrinal guidance on this.
They do, relying heavily on the Protestant framework found in the Westminster tradition to resolve this tension.
Let us unpack that framework. How does the historic Protestant distinction handle a text that so heavily emphasizes human effort and reward without sliding into legalism?
The Westminster Confession offers a precise theological safeguard here. It states that saving faith is never alone in the person justified, but is ever accompanied with all other saving graces.
Okay, so they come as a package.
Right. Good works are defined as the fruits and evidences of a true and lively faith. They are never the ground of justification.
The believer is accepted by God solely based on the imputed righteousness of Christ, which is received by faith alone.
Yes. So the works do not earn the salvation. The works act as the visible, undeniable proof that the salvation is actually present in the heart of the individual.
Ah, I see. So the failure of the wicked steward was not a lack of business acumen.
Not at all.
His failure was rooted in a corrupt, unregenerate theology. He viewed the master as a tyrannical despot. He possessed no love for the master, and he had no trust in his goodness.
And consequently, he produced no fruit.
But the true believer, conversely, views the master as a gracious savior. The believer understands the staggering cost of the grace they have received, and that immense gratitude is the fuel for their labor.
That's beautifully put. They do not sweat and toil to earn a wage of salvation. They labor joyfully because they already possess salvation.
And this psychological shift is what theologians describe as the third use of the law.
Let's define that for listeners.
Sure, the law of God is not just a mirror designed to show us our sin and drive us to repentance, and is not just a civil bridle designed to restrain evil in society.
Those are the first two uses.
Right, but for the regenerate believer, the commands of Christ, including the command to multiply the talents, act as a guide for grateful obedience. The law shows us how to please the God we already love.
The true servant labors because he is an adopted son managing his father's estate, not a terrified slave trying to avoid the whip.
And the root of the servant's barrenness was his lack of living faith. Because he had no apprehension of grace, he had no capacity for genuine works.
The Apostle Paul perfectly models the psychology of the faithful servant. He writes, "By the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them."
True grace does not produce lethargy. True grace produces intense, rigorous labor.
Okay, but I am going to put on the skeptic's hat again.
Go for it.
If salvation is entirely by grace alone, and our works contribute absolutely nothing to our justification, why is this final judgment scene so aggressively focused on productivity?
It's a fair question.
Why does the returning master only audit the return on investment? Why doesn't he just ask them about their faith?
Because a total absence of fruit is definitive. Objective proof that saving grace is entirely absent from the individual's heart.
It's the evidence.
Yes. Jesus teaches this principle consistently throughout his ministry. He states that a good tree bears good fruit, and a bad tree bears bad fruit.
So the master focuses on the productivity during the audit because the external fruit reveals the hidden nature of the root.
And the wicked servant produced absolutely nothing. He did not even manage the minimal interest from the public bankers.
Which was so easy to do.
Right. This total, uncompromising barrenness exposes the terrifying truth. He is not a true servant of the estate.
He wore the uniform of the master's household. He occupied space in the master's domain. He held the master's resources in his hands.
And he possessed the heart of an enemy. And because the total absence of fruit reveals a bad heart, the passage moves from logical exposure to a terrifying final judgment.
The tone shifts completely.
It does. We transition now to the decree of divine confiscation and the exposing of modern illusions. Let's look at verse 28.
It reads, "Take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents.
And the grammatical mood shifts dramatically here. We move away from legal arguments and logical necessity, and we enter the realm of sheer sovereign command.
The Greek text uses an aorist active imperative, erate. This specific verb form demands immediate decisive action. There is no negotiation.
It is a swift decree of divine confiscation. Privilege abused is privilege forfeited.
The master strips him of the asset entirely.
And this sentence, this uncompromising judgment, acts as a heavy polemic against so many modern religious errors that dominate our culture today.
Oh, absolutely. Let us examine the illusions that this text completely dismantles.
The first major illusion is the prosperity gospel.
Right.
This is a heretical system that treats the sovereign God of the universe as a cosmic bellhop. It suggests that God exists primarily to fulfill human ambitions, heal every physical ailment on demand, and secure material wealth for the believer.
But this text proves the opposite is true. We do not own the master. We exist to labor for the master's estate, and he holds absolute sovereign right over our possessions.
We are stewards holding borrowed capital, not owners dictating terms to the Creator.
And the second illusion this judgment dismantles is antinomianism.
Which is the modern concept of cheap grace.
Yes, it is the belief that because salvation is a free gift, God demands no obedience, no effort, and no subsequent change in lifestyle.
It is the idea that you can pray a prayer, secure your eternal fire insurance, and then live however you want, burying your life in the dirt of the world.
This passage absolutely crushes that framework. A faith that demands no obedience is a dead faith, and it ends with the master confiscating everything and casting the servant out.
It's a stark warning. What's the third error confronted here?
The third modern error is the pragmatic, seeker-sensitive movement prevalent in modern evangelicalism. This approach frequently coddles false professors.
It tries to make everyone feel okay.
Right. It hides the reality of divine judgment in order to keep people comfortable in the pews. It measures the success of a church by visible attendance, the quality of the coffee, and the entertainment value of the music, rather than fidelity to the severe demands of the word.
It creates a culture where the church is viewed as a waiting room for heaven. You come in, sit down, listen to a few light self-improvement tips, and wait for the clock to run out.
But this text proves the church is an active, demanding field of labor. It completely shatters the cultural caricature of God as a harmless, grandfatherly figure who winks at our laziness and grades on a curve.
The returning king in this parable is the supreme judge. He is the eschatological Lord whose final verdict determines eternal destiny.
His eyes are like fire, and he demands an exact accounting of what he entrusted to his household.
And the visible church contains both wheat and tares, true believers and false professors, sitting side by side.
This judgment is the moment of permanent separation. The confiscation of the talent is just the preliminary step.
The subsequent verses describe the worthless servant being cast into outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth.
It is a sobering, terrifying reality. The individual who casually calls Jesus Lord yet buries his trust. His trust cannot hide forever behind religious speech.
The master cannot be deceived by religious posturing, perfect church attendance, or an ability to use the right theological jargon.
No, he sees straight through the external facade to the ledger of the heart.
So if we recognize the severity of this decree, we must transition to the personal mandate. How does a first-century judicial ruling land squarely on you today?
Our sources make it clear that the purpose of analyzing this text is not to paralyze you with legalistic terror.
That would be missing the point.
The goal is to propel you into reverent, active, joyful obedience. The first step for anyone studying this text is identifying your trust. What specific assets has the master placed in your hands?
We have to look around our own lives with ruthless honesty. Have you been given a sharp analytical intellect? Have you been given substantial material wealth?
Have you been given a schedule with extra time in your week? Have you been given the minds of your children to shape and mold?
Have you been given a clear understanding of the gospel? You must view all of these things as borrowed capital.
Your mind, your bank account, your children, your free time on a Saturday? None of these are private properties meant for your own self-expression.
They belong to God. Stewardship begins with the fundamental confession that all entrusted resources belong to the master. You are just an administrator of his estate, and the lease is temporary.
This realization brings us to the plea for ordinary action, because there is a massive psychological danger in modern Christianity.
What's that?
We wait around for some stadium-sized opportunity to be faithful while completely ignoring the daily mundane duties right in front of us.
Oh, that is so true. People dream of going overseas to preach to multitudes, but they refuse to sit down and catechize their own kids at the breakfast table.
They admire famous historical missionaries, but they will not speak a single word of truth to their coworker in the next cubicle.
They spend hours debating high-level doctrine on the internet, but they refuse to forgive a family member for a minor personal offense.
The world constantly tells us that true significance requires high visibility and massive scale. But Christ shows us that faithfulness begins with the rigorous execution of the very ordinary, quiet things he has placed before you.
It is the modern trap of wanting to go viral. We want to do something huge that gets millions of views, generates instant applause, and makes us feel significant.
But the master is demanding quiet, daily compound interest in the lives of the people standing right next to you.
Praying in secret when no one is watching. Speaking truth to a neighbor. Honoring the Lord's day. Resisting a private temptation when you are alone in a hotel room.
And this specific focus on ordinary action provides immense theological comfort for the one-talent steward. We have to acknowledge that not everyone is given 5 talents.
Not everyone is given a massive public platform, immense generational wealth, or extraordinary visible fruit in their ministry.
Many faithful believers labor in complete lifelong obscurity. But the master commends faithfulness itself, not the volume of worldly success.
That is a critical detail in the text. When the master returns, he says the exact same words to the 2-talent servant that he says to the 5-talent servant.
He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master."
The reward is identical because the faithfulness was identical, even though the sheer financial return was smaller.
The master sees the small, hidden obedience that the world entirely ignores. A mother patiently teaching scripture to her toddlers day after day, a widow giving quietly from her limited fixed funds.
Or a worker refusing dishonest gain at his job when no one is looking. These are not buried talents. These are the faithful, highly profitable actions of a steward who loves the king.
You do not need to envy the platform of the 5-talent servant. You simply need to be fiercely diligent with the specific trust you hold right now.
So what does all of this mean for us as we conclude this deep dive?
We have covered a lot of ground today.
We really have. We have witnessed the unmasking of the slothful servant. We have watched his corrupt, malice-filled theology get systematically shredded by the brilliant logic of the returning king.
We have established that laziness in the kingdom of God is not a personality trait. It is active wickedness, a cosmic treason against the estate of God.
We've seen how this text strips away our modern excuses,
Mhm.
our polite clinical names for apathy, and drives us to depend entirely on the grace of the faithful Christ.
Because Jesus Christ is the ultimate faithful servant. Where we fail repeatedly in our stewardship, Christ perfectly executed the will of the Father.
He did not bury what was given to him. He poured out his life, endured the agony of the cross, and secured absolute redemption for his people.
It is his imputed righteousness that saves the believer, and it is his renewing spirit that makes our weak, stumbling, ordinary efforts acceptable and fruitful in the eyes of the Father.
I want to leave you with a final, unsettling concept to consider as you go about your week. Think about the absolute illusion of autonomy.
It is quite an illusion.
We walk around every single day, acting as if we are the autonomous CEOs of our own existence. We look at our calendars and our bank accounts and we say, "This is mine."
But you do not own your life.
When you wake up tomorrow morning, I want you to realize that your very breath is a leased asset. The air filling your lungs is borrowed capital, granted to you by a king who is currently away on a journey, but who is absolutely guaranteed to return.
How does knowing that every single second of your Tuesday is borrowed property alter what you will do with it?
Think back to that courtroom scale we discussed at the beginning. The verdict is coming. The master is returning to audit his estate. The question is not how much volume you will have to show him, but whether he will find you faithful with the exact measure he placed in your hands.